There are various ways to start your thread when you stitch. One of those is with a loop start. So what I did here is I took my embroidery thread and I folded it in half. So these are my ends right here. I threaded those through my needle so that way I have a loop at the other end. Now when I start my stitching, I will come up from the back of the fabric. We want to gently tug so we leave a little bit of a loop on the back here. And now I'm just going to go make my first stitch. So say I'm just doing a short little stitch forward here. When I go back through, I want to bring my needle through that loop and we'll gently tug so that loop is flush with the fabric on the back and my stitch is flush on the front. And then I could keep stitching. So I would just say we're doing a couple satin stitches here. I'll just come back and keep on stitching like so. And the great thing about the loop start is that there's no knot on the back. It's just nice and flush back there. So if you have an exposed back or something that's going to get a lot of movement, a loop start is a really great way to start your thread. You do need an even number of threads to start with the loop start. Laid thread is another way to start your embroidery stitching. With this one, we also start without a knot at the end. I'll come up from the back of my fabric here, and I will gently tug, so that way I just have a little bit of thread hanging out on the back. There's a tail. And I'm just going to kind of hold on to that on the back there. And now I'm going to start stitching. So let's just say I'm going to do some chain stitches. So I'll come down right next to where I was, come on up. When I come up here, I want to try to catch that tail in the back of this. So I'm just going to move my needle over to the other side where I want that, making sure I'm still in my loop in the front, and gently tug here. And we'll keep going, catching that thread on the back. So again, right there. And with this type of stitching, you kind of have to pay attention to the front and the back. It's a little bit like couching, but not quite. Go, because on the back, we're tacking this thread down and covering it up with our stitching. But you just really have to pay a little more attention to where your needle's going in and out of the fabric and have access to the back of our embroidery. So you can see I kind of put my needle in to know where I wanted it, and I'm just adjusting so that way I can catch my thread. I'm going to lose my loop here for my chain stitch. Like I said, a little more complicated with this one. There we go. All right, and after you've gone about 2 or 3 stitches, your thread should probably be pretty secured on the back there, so you're good to go to keep on stitching. And then if you have any extra thread bits, you could cut those away. But that is our laid thread start. Another way to start your thread without a knot is called a covered stitches start. So when we do this one, we come up from the back again, and we just want to leave a little bit of a tail back here, and we'll hold it down. And I'm just going to do a few stitches in some different directions here. And as I do that, I'm covering the tail on the back here. And it doesn't really matter what these stitches are doing. We just want to make sure we're kind of catching that tail on the back so it's secured a little bit. Then I would cover this with my other stitches. So let's say I was doing satin stitches. So I would just come up below those stitches, and then we just start overlapping the stitches there with the stitches that are actually filling in the space that I want. This style of starting your thread helps kind of make the back smoother so you don't have any funky knots, It also adds a little extra padding to the underside of your satin stitch. So if you're looking for something to lay extremely flush, this might not be the stitch for that, but it's an easy way to hide those starting stitches and add a little extra texture to your design. So there we go. There's my satin stitches, and you can see the back is all covered up there, and I would just trim away that extra thread. But my thread end would be covered up, and I can just keep on stitching. So that is the covered stitches start. If you would like to start your thread with a knot at the end, my favorite way to do that is with the quilter's knot. So I'm going to move this piece out of the way for a second. And when we do this, we want to thread our needle so that we have a short side of thread and a long side of thread. And the long side just needs to be longer than the short side. I hold the short side towards the inside of my palm, hold my needle in my dominant hand with the pointy side facing up. We take the very end of my long end of thread, cross that in front of my needle, so I make a little plus sign, and then I pinch that thread and needle together between my thumb and finger that is holding the needle. In my other hand, I have a loop of thread. I take the top part of that loop and wrap it around my needle 3 times. You can wrap in any direction. If you have fewer strands of thread, you might want to wrap more. If you have more strands of thread, you could wrap less, but 3 is usually a pretty good number. After I've wrapped that thread, I want to pinch it between my thumb and finger that's holding the needle, let go of that loop in my other hand, and then I keep pinching that thread here as I pull my needle straight up. Sometimes you gotta wiggle it over the eye, and then I want to grab the needle by the eye and keep pulling until I get to the very end of my long end of thread. You can see I have a nice solid knot there. Then, if you have any thread after your knot, we'll just trim that away, and I cut mine nice and flush. There's no extra funky bits on the back or to come up from the front. And then I can just start stitching. So come on up, gently tug so I feel that knot nice and flush with the back there. That's my knot. And then we can just stitch away. This type of start, the quilter's knot, is a really great way to anchor your stitches on the back. It does leave a raised knot on the back there, so it's great for areas that are not exposed or that you're okay with having more texture and things on the back there. But that is our quilter's knot. The waist knot is another way to start stitching in embroidery. And with this one, you are essentially throwing away your knot. So that's why it's called the waist knot. When we start this, we need a knot at the end of our thread. And unlike most starting types, we are going to start on the front of our fabric. And I want to start very far away from where I will be stitching. So if I'm stitching over in this area, I'm going to bring my needle down a few inches away from that. And sometimes it's better if you do this in a section that is outside of your design. So we'll bring it down so you can see my knot is flush on the front of my fabric here. Then I will come on up further away, so all the way over here. And as you can see on the back, I have this really long piece of thread. Now I'm going to start stitching, and when I stitch, I want to cover up part of this long thread. And that way, when I go to cut away my knot, that will be covered up and essentially leave a knotless back. So we'll just say I'm doing a few little short stitches here, like so. And as I'm making these, I'm catching this thread on the back, and I would just do whatever stitches I wanted in this section here. Keep on stitching here, covering up that really long thread on the back. And when I'm done stitching, I am going to cut away this knot on the front. So I'll just kind of give it a little tug, pull it up away from my fabric, and snip that knot end away. And then if I had any of this thread on the back still, I can just cut that away, and you can see the tail end is covered up by all of my stitching right there. So in a sense, I have no knot because my knot was thrown away. And that is how you start the waist knot.